let me know when the fun starts.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City. And now somewhere off the coast of Africa, it's Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. I have absolutely no jurisdiction over Genosha. I don't want any part in that.
Does anyone truly have jurisdiction in Genosha?
I hope you can enlighten us on what in the hell's bells is going on over there.
I don't know. I don't know that anyone can truly say. I mean, yes, I can tell you what Genosha. I mean, I think if you've seen this episode, Slave Island, you know exactly what Genosha is. First of all, I want to say once again, we're a little late bringing this episode out. As we alluded to in the previous episode, you and we be busy doing lots of stuff. One of those things actually came out, so we can talk about it. And I think it's kind of cool. It's not X-Men related. It's not even Batman related. But you and I got to go to Jim Henson Company, and we got to work with Jim and... we got to work with Brian and Lisa Henson. And we got to meet Toby Froud, who some people may remember as the little baby in Labyrinth. And we just got to do some cool Labyrinth and Dark Crystal stuff. I was going for work. I was producing and directing part of this event, particularly the camera crews. We had 4 camera crews, 8 cameras. Lots of stuff happening. We had influencers there. We had fans of the movies there. And you were there as a member of my crew. Tell me what you thought of that experience as we celebrated the, the re-release of Dark Crystal and Labyrinth at the Jim Henson Company.
Well, what you know is that I grew up watching The Dark Crystal.
Yes.
That was one of the movies that I saw early, when did that come out? I think it was early 80s, but through mid 80s, late 80s, that was one of the movies that my sister and I watched all the time. Like we would just kind of like play around the house and like quote the movie and talk about the essence and the Skeksis. And it is just something that I grew up just loving. So to be, we've been to the studios before, but to spend a whole day in this all day event with basically the vision to partner with the Henson Company and with the studios and bring all of that nostalgia and all of that whimsical, magical stuff to life with this product that we're putting together, that your company's putting together. It was just a treat to be a part of it. So I think as a fan, but also as someone who was kind of behind the scenes, looking at everything through the production side, it was really fun. It was such an enjoyable day.
There were like 4 stations. There was the opportunity to have Q&As with Brian Henson about Labyrinth. And for folks who don't know, Brian Henson is the son of Jim, and he worked extensively on Labyrinth. At the very least, you would know him as the puppeteer and voice behind Hoggle. And amongst other roles that he had in that movie behind the scenes. And then Lisa Henson, who is now the CEO of the Jim Henson Company, and she talked extensively about the Dark Crystal. Mm-hmm. Then Toby Froud talked about his being in Labyrinth, but more importantly about growing up, having been around his father, Brian Froud, who is really the concept artist and designer of many of these creatures from both Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. And then also growing up, simply having been part of that legacy. And now he is currently working in stop motion animation. He worked on Pinocchio, the Guillermo del Toro.
Which one? There was a year where there were like 5 Pinocchio movies.
Yeah, in that same
out.
year is Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Toby Froud
Really?
worked on
He worked
that
on that?
film in the stop motion animation. And then we got an opportunity to take a tour of the entire lot. And if you're not aware of the history of the studio where they currently are, this is literally the studio that Charlie Chaplin built and owned. It was Chaplin Studios.
Yeah.
And Brian Henson's office is Charlie's old office. I mean, these buildings are exactly how they were when Charlie Chaplin was there. And so there's a lot of history that went into that studio and into the tour that you got to see. And then we also got to see some cosplayers. We got to see a contact juggler, and that contact juggler started doing little tutorials with folks. And
I think you got to say what a contact juggler is.
so in Labyrinth, when David Bowie is holding those iconic crystal balls, and he's doing different things, he's manipulating those balls. The idea of juggling we think of as being throwing balls in the air and catching them. In this case, it's the ball never leaves contact with the human body. So it's equally difficult, if not even more so, to be a good contact juggler than it is to be a juggler. And the idea of being able to stabilize a ball on your hand
and it's
and your arms, and
it's a feat of illusion.
Yeah.
These are illusionists. They are also jugglers, but they're able to, like you said, manipulate the prop to make it look like it's moving on its own, that it has a life and spirit of its own. It's really amazing to see. But huge thanks to the Jim Henson Company, to the studios, to Shout Studios, for having me be a part of the project. And
what was your favorite part?
well, what can I say? I think there were 2 parts that I found very meaningful. One was to see the artistry up close. So the actual puppets, some that are decades old, others that are newer, because of course Netflix had a recent series that was a prequel to the Dark Crystal.
Yeah.
So to see that artistry and that level of talent, these remarkable feats of art up close, but to also see the nostalgic ones, the Skeksis and the
Chamberlain Skeksis was right there.
Yeah, the clothing,
yeah.
the accoutrements, and the little models. I think that is it's just a reminder how meaningful visual art and film can be. And the second part that I found really meaningful was listening to the folks at the Henson Company, especially Brian Henson, actually talking about working for pretty much his adult lifetime. He got started, 18, 19 years old.
Yeah, like
with
right
his
out
father.
of boarding school.
So to listen to that storytelling and to hear him talk about his experiences on these projects, and to hear him talk on the more recent threats to this art, whether it was COVID or the strikes or the challenges with making these kinds of films.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that it's so important to keep revitalizing and re-releasing these films. There's more to it than just kind of like selling them again. I think there's something meaningful to it as far as reminding us how enchanting and special these original films are, but also they don't do movies like this anymore with all the practical effects and the puppetry and the love and care. It's not automated. Every little feather, every little piece of fabric, every little sand, piece of sand is so human connected, and it's all there. That I also want to add that folks can visit the studios. There's shows there, there's events there, so there's opportunities to kind of see it up close. It's
occasionally
intimate.
they'll open it up to the public for like
Yeah.
Puppet Up and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But it is a working studio, so they're constantly doing stuff there, and it's fascinating. But I just wanted to bring that up because again, we mentioned last episode that we have been doing a lot of stuff that we couldn't talk about, and then this happened, and it was something that we can now talk about. And if you go to our individual social media accounts, you'll be able to see your posts from some of the cool props and the costumes and the various folks that you got to take pictures with. And then same for mine. But then there's more coming that we can't currently talk about, but we are excited about those things finally making themselves known to the public.
I would also like to mention that I was out for a few days. I was out of town, and I want to just acknowledge and give a huge thanks to the group of firefighters I was working with in San Diego. Shout out to Amy and to the folks over there for their amazing stewardship and care of the wildlife and wildland in California. So I was invited to work with specifically the district rangers of the state of California, and they oversee all of the wildland firefighters. They supervise those amazing first responders who are not just protecting the land and the wildlife, but also preserving the national parks. They work with the U.S. Forest Service, the indigenous and historically honored spaces, and not just the wildland, but the protected land that is so special to indigenous folks, as well as actually fighting fires. And in the past few years, there have been so many devastating fires in Northern and Southern California that they've been battling. So I spent a day with them and had the real honor to speak with them about mental health and burnout and strategies to stay resilient. And it was really just meaningful to spend that much time with them and just be a part of their work for just a little bit.
That's cool. And you got to bring home a comic book signed by Smokey the Bear.
Little did I know there's a Smokey the Bear comic book.
Yeah, tells his origin story. I'm very excited about talking about X-Men.
I do have one more thing I need to do.
Okay.
But let me take a swig of my fruit. My fruit smoothie for a second.
Okay. Is this an advertisement?
Mm-mm.
Are you now endorsing?
I'm covering the labels.
Oh, okay.
I just need a quick sugar burst.
Okay.
I'm about to issue my apology.
Oh, you have an
Okay.
apology.
So I want to spend a moment to deliver a genuine apology about Sabretooth.
Oh.
I
Okay.
have to do this because there are people, Brian, including you, who had given me the insight, who day of said, this man is clothed. And I insisted multiple times that he was naked. Not only that, but multiple people messaged me, not to come for me, not to fight me on it, but just to say, I understand where you're coming from. Here's some comic book references, and these are gentle, very kind messages to me. No one was really combative at all.
And this happened on the internet?
I know, right? But here's why I want to issue this apology. When I thought back to how insistent I was that this man was not wearing clothes, I realized where that was coming from.
Okay. You didn't want him to be wearing clothes.
I could not grok the concept of this man choosing to augment his mutism or mutant identity. And let me be clear about that. While you sat here and said he's wearing like a fur, like some like fur covering.
Yeah.
He's wearing this skin tight unitard. He's wearing. My mind kept going to the idea that it would be unreasonable for this mutant to kind of like be so bold with his mutant identity. And in fact, my brain kept going to, why isn't he hiding his mutant identity? Why isn't, like, I kept going toward the idea that the reason I felt this was his real self, this must be his real body, because why would you put that on yourself? Why would you augment, and why would you not mute? Wouldn't you spend time, if you're going to put clothing on, wouldn't you mute and background and erase your sense of self because of how dangerous it is to be a mutant? And I want to kind of like celebrate him. Not only is he out there as Sabretooth and not hiding his mutant attributes, he's embellishing. He's sort of proudly, boldly coming out as, this is me. I'm going to put on more beastly, monstrous costumes so that you are not mistaken about who I am.
Yeah.
And I think that I sort of took that away from him, like just in this conversation, right? Obviously, he's not a real person.
Right.
But I was not giving him the credit for being so authentic and self-actualized. Who am I to say you've got to cover that up? Or who am I to say that's too loud for me?
Yeah.
So I just appreciate that the reality is he's living his life in his form and not letting anyone mistake that.
Yeah.
It's I think it's a true championship of who he is, and I love him.
I appreciate that. I want to back step a little bit by saying I don't think you were ever wrong in the regard of whether or not this particular character is the guy who would be putting this on. And I don't think you're wrong. I don't see it. I don't see Sabretooth as being someone who wants to be flamboyant about who they are. And I don't think that they are someone who wants to just present as, as someone who is wearing a skin tight unitard down to his toes. That being said, in the context of real world comic books, of course they're going to give him a costume. Of course he's going to look ridiculous. But does anyone actually think Victor Creed, Sabretooth, is gonna be the guy who's like, yeah, I want that one. I want something that's skin tight, really hard to put on. I want something that has fur around the collar. I want to look like this. I don't see him being that guy.
Well, he clearly chooses this look. I mean, the artists choose the look, but
correct.
Personality-wise, we're trying to translate this into real life. And if I were to think about, and this is why this is a show about psychology, we spent 20 minutes arguing over whether he was wearing clothes, but the psychology of this for me is, what if this is a choice? What if this is him being this fierce?
Yeah.
Like he acknowledges that he is a fierce person.
Yeah.
And why erase that part of himself because it makes people uncomfortable? That's all I'm saying about that. There's certainly a lot more we need to talk about in terms of this character, but I think for me, it actually does make more sense that this is a choice.
Yeah. Couple of other little things. One is they released the sequel series trailer. The X-Men 97 trailer came out this past week. You got a chance to see it. I got a chance to see it. What did you think of that? Did it make you more excited about upcoming episodes?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm excited for it.
Okay.
I didn't squint too hard at the the trailer. I don't want to know too much.
Yeah.
So
well,
I
there's a
just
huge
kinda,
spoiler in the beginning of it
Yeah.
about the end of this series.
Yeah. It clearly picks up at the very end of this series, which
Yeah.
I like.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be great. The animation isn't the same animation. It's not trying to emulate the early 90s style of animation. I'm not mad at that.
Yeah.
I'll give it a chance.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be very aligned with what we're talking about on the show.
Yeah.
So I'm just super excited. How about you?
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm interested to see what they do with it. Similar to what you were just sort of alluding to, I didn't love the animation. It's just a different style, and it's a cleaner style, and it's a little more smooth. It's less cell driven. You know, I was even when we were watching this episode, Slave Island, I was just noticing just how quaint and how charming the animation is, because you can see the shadow from each layer of the cell on top of the background. You know, there's just like little outlines around people that sort of come and go based on where the animation cell is sitting on the background at the time that they are being photographed. And you lose that in contemporary animated series. It's not the same. And it's, but that being said, it feels like the old X-Men, sort of sounds like the old X-Men. I mean, they've brought back a number of the original cast members to reprise their roles. Cal Dodd does not really sound the same, but he's not going to. I mean, you're talking about, you know, a show from, you know, what, 93 to 96 or, you know, something like that. It was so many years ago. He's not going to sound like the same Wolverine that we know, but he is coming back to play Wolverine. Other characters or, you know, other performers are coming back, but not as the original characters. I applaud the voice actress behind the original Jubilee for deciding not to play Jubilee because she is not an Asian American actor. And this is an Asian American character. And so she said, it would not be right for me to play this role again. This should go to an Asian American performer. And now it is, you know, so I applaud things like that. It's like the actors are getting the messages of X-Men correct. You know, like they get it.
Yeah, they've got to walk the walk. You can't tell these really impactful sociopolitical stories and not think about what it takes to tell the story, the production behind the story to some degree. So I agree with you on that.
One last little plug, and this isn't for us, but it's for our good friends over at Geek History Lesson. Jason and Ashley have just released a mega episode. This is a gargantuan episode all about the X-Men. And it's specifically because the new series is about to drop, and they're like, what do you want to know? We will tell you what you need to know to get you started. And so they have dropped a gigantic episode all about the X-Men. And I am only about halfway through it, and I'm loving every bit of it. So I wanted to shout them out. They didn't ask for this. I just wanted to make it clear that if there are things you still want to know about the X-Men that are beyond what we're talking about, because like you said, we're focusing on the psychology, not so much on the history and the characters and where this came from and where this went. Go over, listen to Jason and Ashley over at the Geek History Lesson. Their newest episode is phenomenal. Like I said, I'm very excited to talk about the X-Men. So much so, I'm even wearing my shirt, my Wolverine shirt. For those of you not on Patreon watching the video, it is a bright red shirt of an actual Wolverine. It's the Wolverine animal, but he has Wolverine's claws extended out of his paws, and he's got a little cigar in his mouth, and the word snicked, the onomatopoeia that's famous for every time Wolverine unleashes his claws, snicked. This shirt reminds me very much of our old friend.
I was just going to say, this reminds me of Len.
Yeah.
Because he appreciated that shirt when you would wear it around him.
Yeah. Our old friend Len Wein, the creator of Wolverine. loved this shirt. So I dug it out today and I wanted to wear it because we're talking X-Men. I was feeling it. This episode picks up directly off of the end of the last one, previously on X-Men, where Storm, Jubilee, and Gambit had gone to Genosha to try out this resort that was supposed to be inclusive of mutants. And we saw them captured. By whom we didn't know, but it was definitely a militarized unit of some kind. They tried to gas them in their rooms. Gambit got them out using the kinetic energy in his playing cards. But outside there were helicopters and tanks and other vehicles ready and characters ready to pounce on them. 99.9% of this episode takes place on Genosha. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. There is one scene that sort of explains what otherwise would have been Deus Ex Machina at the end, which is back at the manor. Xavier is busy contemplating or doing something. He seems to be doing something a little mysterious when Scott and Jean express that they can't seem to get in touch with their friends
over the telephone.
Because
they're calling the hotel and they're not getting through.
And they're not getting through.
Can I ask you a question about Professor X?
You can try.
Okay. How does he not know about the evils on the island of Genosha?
You mean psychically? Like, how has he not picked up on this?
A number of reasons. Yes. Psychically, he has this. He's one of the most powerful mutants with his telepathic abilities. He's also pretty well connected. Mm-hmm. He knows the histories of a lot of mutants, whether they're X-Men or not.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether he knows enough about Genosha to understand this was a risky move to send X-Men there.
Well, remember, he sent X-Men to Genosha under the guise of going on vacation, but they were really supposed to scope the island out themselves. I am not convinced that Xavier didn't know kind of the nefarious schemes of those running Genosha. Mm-hmm. How? I don't know. I don't know if he's prodding minds around the world, trying to learn more. I don't know what he's heard from the underground. Remember, we only found out about Genosha because a friend of Gambit recommended that they go check it out. So if a friend of Gambit is telling him they should check it out, a friend of Xavier probably came to him at some point and was like, you should check this place out. It's a good question, but because we only spent 2 lines of dialogue with Xavier in this episode, I am not convinced that we won't find out later that he may have known a little bit more about what was going on. Mm-hmm. I can't say that with great certainty, but it's a possibility. He did drop a name, though, that was interesting to me. He, at the end of that scene, decided to call his old friend Moira McTaggart. That name is an important one and is one that you're going to want to remember because she's a big deal in the story of Charles Xavier.
Okay.
So yeah, this gives us a really good opportunity to spend a lot of time specifically with Storm and with Gambit in this episode. Jubilee is sort of our proxy.
Right.
She's the one who wants this island to be cool and she wants to go out and like have fun in the sun. And then there's the possibility that Gambit might be a traitor, that Gambit might be feeding information to the Genosians, that, he might be turning against the X-Men. And so through her eyes, we are equally disappointed in him.
Yeah.
Storm is a little ambitious and probably a little too impulsive at one moment.
Well,
they put collars on them.
Yeah, we got to break down the actual labor camp here, right?
Yeah.
So all of the mutants have these locked collars around their necks, and the the technology is powerful enough to essentially wipe all of their mutant powers while it's on, and then these guards are able to turn off the collars. They're still wearing them, but they can kind of like unlock them.
Yeah. Think Running Man.
Well, not everyone knows what Running Man is.
Schwarzenegger movie where they're wearing the collars around their neck. If they go across a certain border, their head explodes. If they try to fight back, their heads will explode.
Yeah, it's Suicide Squad.
It's that, it's the common trope of you have something implanted or you're wearing a collar of some kind. If you try to remove it, your head will explode.
Right.
And they are wearing collars and they're told your head will explode.
and all of these guards are following the instruction and direction of somebody called the leader.
Yeah.
And he's
formerly the colonel, apparently.
Yeah, kind of a unique guy.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure I understand
his outfit
is all about, but he's
definitely not
naked. What is that? That's historically would be
it
kind of like founding fathers.
Yeah, it seems almost colonial, but it's also of the wrong sort of color palette. So it is a super villain colonial type outfit. I think you're nailing it. I think the idea is that he's a founding father of this island and is therefore meant to be the leader.
Oh, okay. He's trying to
but he's even like down to
that.
Almost like the gray powdered wigs sort of look.
He's trying to sort of represent that he's powerful. that he's creating a society.
Yes.
He's instilling, developing, basically trying to initiate this island as his nation.
Yes.
That's my understanding. Through the abuse on the backs of these mutants who are essentially slave laborers in this camp. I mean, there's a lot of aspects here that are historical reminders, just these elements that, whether it's the language or the way that this leader treats the mutants here, we understand this as an analog to potentially many things, right? The transatlantic slave trade, the internment camps in Northern California, concentration camps. There's a lot of really heavy stuff here. And the folks who have been at this camp, the mutants, have been there for a while. The newcomers, Gambit, Jubilee, and Storm, are realizing other mutants have been here for a while. Mm-hmm. So much so that they no longer have a fight in them. They acquiesce to the power dynamic. They do as they're told.
They're told if they finish building a dam, that they'll be set free.
And
I don't think anyone actually believes that.
I think some of them, they have varied levels of hope around that. Some of them have this sort of learned helplessness where they just submit. Mm-hmm. There's one character that actually says, if we just follow directions, we might get out of here. So that's another response to this kind of trauma. And you mentioned Storm being kind of impulsive. And I think this is just the various stages of one's psychology when you're in this oppressed state, that if there's a moment to fight back, you might take it. Mm-hmm. That's a very human moment when they tell her, like, while you're building this dam, we've turned the locks off, and she's basically
so that you can use specifically so that they can use their various mutant powers in order to help advance the progress in building the dam.
And she immediately flies out into the sky, says F this, and attacks the guards, which I don't think that's impulsive.
And then they turn the collar back on and she falls.
Yeah.
She falls down. and they throw her in the box, which is very Cool Hand Luke. And even that episode of Batman the Animated Series where he lost his memory and was there in the prison, in the dirty, dusty prison, and they put him in the box. But when you're talking about Aurora, she doesn't want to be in a tiny box. So that answers the question that I had last time was, do you think they have now taken care of her claustrophobia, her severe claustrophobia? We now know they have not. She is still living with this, and she's still dealing with the pain that comes with being in dark, enclosed areas. But she is basically in that box throughout most of this episode because she decided to go up against the leader and the military that was keeping them hostage. Gambit suspiciously is encouraging Jubilee to not get involved. He's trying to pull Storm back. He is the one who convinces the government or the military that you're not going to want to kill her right away. You're going to want to save her because ultimately with her powers, you will be able to fill the water needed for this dam. The dam is being built specifically in order to create more electricity, more power than this island has previously been able to maintain for itself, because they are building hundreds, if not thousands more of the Sentinel robots. And they need that power in order to fuel an even larger version. If the Sentinels almost look like they were like a 1/6 scale to this gigantic,
I don't know why
master mold.
Why does he have to look like a Sentinel? Because he's just baking them.
But they're playing it out as like a mother type figure, like because a little door would open up and out of a conveyor belt would come a fully realized Sentinel, and they were just constantly reproducing. But I don't think. Well, and if it was, I mean, the name for this gigantic Sentinel was
Mama.
but was like what, like master mold, right?
Yeah.
So if it is actually a mold, then you would want it to look like whatever you're going to pull out of it. But basically they've just created a great reason for making an even more gigantic robot.
Yeah.
And it's sitting comfortably, it's plugged into the wall, it's sitting down, and just constantly birthing Sentinels. They're not even building this in a factory anymore. Like this master mold, it is the factory. And so
it's like the alien queen.
Yeah, very much. But the idea is that they're using up all the electricity on the island, and so they need this dam to be operational so that they can continue to do it. And that's the real dastardly bit about this, right? Is they're bringing the mutants in. They are human trafficking the mutants to the island and enslaving them so that they build the dam that will ultimately operate the machinery needed to capture and destroy more of their kind.
Right.
And so, that's a big deal.
And my sense is that the leader, the colonel, is working closely with those two guys, Dr. Trask and Gilroy. Remember that guy's name?
The other one.
The other guy.
Well, and you remember
Dr. Trask and Mr. Gyrick.
Yeah. So they were told that their funding was being revoked by the U.S. government. And so they skipped out. They then went to Genosha, and they're now working for the leader. But they continue to mass produce the Sentinels.
And my sense is there's no plan to release any of the mutants. This is a promise they tell them to kind of keep them in line, to ensure there isn't a coup or rebellion, to kind of make sure that they're continuing to serve as these slaves.
This is literally Auschwitz, right?
Yeah.
Like this is right above the gates in Auschwitz. There was the famous sign "Arbeit macht frei," work will make you free. And so the idea is, if you're willing to work, we're not going to kill you. And at the end of this whole thing, you get to go off and be free. And these people in the beginning probably didn't believe that, but they've now had to tell themselves that it's true in order to maintain any bit of hope.
It's sort of a shared delusion that they need to rely on in order to survive. I'm so glad you brought that up too, because it's juxtaposed with the philosophies that Storm brings in to the camp, because and I think you have this clip, you can play it, where once she tries to escape and attack the guards, and then they capture her. And this is where Gambit's sort of trying to negotiate, like, look, because they're going to kill her. They decide to destroy her.
Straight up says, take care of her permanently.
Yeah. And Gambit's trying to kind of gamble with her capital. Like, look, she's not just another mutant who can, move rocks with her mind. She can actually manipulate the weather. Yeah. She could do amazing things if you're making a dam.
When you interrogated her, she didn't tell you what she can actually do.
And here's what she says, if you can play the clip.
Sure, here we go.
Dispose of this one permanently.
You're making a mistake! You don't know what she can do!
Gambit, what are you doing? Knowledge is power!
Be silent. According to her interrogation,
she didn't tell you nothing. She can control the weather. She'll make it rain like a big storm, fill up this lake in no time.
Yes, that would be useful. Until the dam is ready, put her in the box.
I think this is, again, the philosophy that is juxtaposed with the oppressed philosophy. It's the counter to this oppression. Its liberation is actually knowing as much as you can. And also, so knowledge is power. Also, it works in a transaction. So sharing that knowledge is also something that is powerful. It can be weaponized.
Yeah.
It can be manipulated.
But in this case, it also acted as currency.
Yes. Oh, for
by
sure.
By withholding that
Absolutely.
information, she was going to die. And then by him giving the information, it kept her alive.
He was able to leverage it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. And she, this is what leads to her being thrown in what they call the box, which is a locker. These are designed, these metal boxes, these metal lockers are designed to essentially serve as cells.
And you're talking about metal boxes in the middle of a dusty, sunny, hot area. So this is meant to be torture, not just solitary confinement, but it is genuinely meant to be like a sweat box.
Also, I think for someone like Storm, this is torture above and beyond the torture you just described.
Correct.
Because her connection is really central. Like with the way that I think about her powers, she is connected to biophilia. So biophilia is this this meaningful bond between people and nature.
Yeah.
And for her, it's above and beyond what most people have, this special relationship. And it's almost like sensory deprivation, but at the level that would be a form of torture for someone like Storm, who can't connect to the essence of the things in the world in nature that not only make her powerful, but make her feel meaningful, give her spirit, give her fuel to live. So she's being drained of this as she's sitting in this dark, cold metal locker.
Can I read from Eric and Julia Lewald's book? I've mentioned this a couple times on the podcast already, but we are obviously pulling a great deal of information from X-Men, the art and making of the animated series by Eric Lewald, who's the story editor, today would be known as a showrunner, and his wife, who's also one of the writers, Julia. There is a moment, or there is a section here in the book where we're basically treated to the character descriptions from the Writer's Bible. And I just want to read this one about Storm, also known as Aurora, is African. Her great mutant power is that she has control over the elements. Like Cyclops, she has a difficult time controlling her power, so she's emotionally restrained. Storm is dignified, elegant, almost regal. She loves nature. Her room at the school is an atrium. Alone there, she creates small storms to water the plants and to cut loose. For her, it's liberating, like dancing.
Yeah.
When she was a child, her parents were killed in Cairo when a bombed building collapsed around them, leaving her buried in rubble. The incident left her horribly claustrophobic. We have seen this, so that's not a spoiler. Orphaned, she grew up in the streets of northern Africa, where she was an ace pickpocket. And they do mention in this episode, Jean Grey says she grew up on the streets of Cairo. I'm pretty sure she can take care of herself without a telephone. This is a portion of her past she's not ashamed of. She did what was necessary to survive. Storm is everything Wolverine is not. Dignified, respectful of life, serene. He thinks she should let the storm inside go free. She thinks he should tame his animal passions. When the team splits apart, Storm tends to lead the section Cyclops is not in. Don't let her serenity fool you. She's a fierce leader. And when Wolverine's on her team, she won't let him step out of line. Storm adores Jubilee, her newfound younger sister, who is actually on this trip to Genosha with them. Storm can create any weather system the local environment will permit. Now, that's very important. The local environment. So she can create a snowstorm if in New York, but not in the Sahara. She flies on self-created air currents. In space, she's virtually powerless. She's very strong, and her senses, like her eyesight, are nearly as keen as Wolverine's. So
it's so interesting how I love that, but also it's interesting how each of the characters are measured against Wolverine. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how Wolverine is this person?
Yeah. Yes, because Cyclops absolutely was. Well, so I also want to read Gambit's. I'm going to hold on to that for a moment, though, so that we can talk a little bit about Storm based on what you've just heard here. Tell me what you think. How much of this episode, and this is what we've talked about, the importance of a writer's Bible. No matter who's writing the episode, they need to adhere to the character as defined in this description. Let's talk a little bit about Aurora.
Well, I mean, I think certainly this episode features her a lot,
yes,
especially around her abilities to stay cool and calm under pressure with the lived experience that you must defend yourself and you must sort of take control of your liberties, take control of your body and your powers and your connection to in this case, the nature around you for survival.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of what you just described in this episode. And again, I noticed that Whereas you might have seen something impulsive, I saw something that was about survivorship. I saw something around her knowing what it's like to be fighting oppressors and trying to find the opportunity to combat that or to intervene when possible. And I think it was also, they had never been in this situation before. They don't know about these collars. They don't know if this is an experiment. She really tested that. So it was risky, for sure.
Absolutely. But I would think, as someone who grew up a pickpocket on the streets of Cairo, that she's a bit more roguish. She's a bit more clever about when she decides to...
Like, she would probably strategize a way out of this.
She would probably process her way out of it and try to figure out the best time, especially if you're talking about someone that is just described here as being the B team leader.
Yeah. Well, and I want to pull trauma into this too, because we're realizing that while it's called claustrophobia in the show, and I don't mind that because it's sort of accelerating an understanding of what her fear is. It's a shortcut to say, look, this character is fearful in enclosed spaces because of her history.
But it's also probably compounded. Like, she has claustrophobia.
She has both. She has PTSD and claustrophobia.
PTSD as well.
Right.
Yes.
And so if I were to really conceptualize a profile for her in terms of her mental health, I would say PTSD is a likely diagnosis, because what led to the fear of being in enclosed spaces, dark spaces, was that singular traumatic event when she was in her youth. And I want to mention that too, because we're realizing that, look, she's not perfect. She made a decision that put her at risk and put the team at risk. I think we can also look at it as a traumatic response. The narrative that she was being told was, you have these locked collars around your necks and you're going to be controlled. And that could have been, and just above, and clearly that's a threatening message, but there may have been something about that led her to act.
Yeah.
There's no reality I'll be in where I'm under that level of control.
Yeah.
And I think it's helpful to understand that for her, yes, she controls the weather, but it's not under pure control.
Yeah.
It's under a huge amount of discernment and diligence, where she has, like Cyclops, she has to constantly be under this sort of self-surveillance and management and navigation of her powers in the world.
Yeah.
This was a huge threat to her ability to do any of that. And I think that justifies why she behaved the way that she did.
Could I also throw out a very real world example? Someone that I knew in high school was so incredibly claustrophobic that she couldn't wear tight clothing. Mm-hmm. Like, she needed her clothing to be as baggy as humanly possible, because she needed to feel like she wasn't being confined. And it's possible that this confining, restrictive collar made her so uncomfortable that the moment it was turned off, she freaked out and had to
time to free oneself.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, there's a lot of sensory experiences that co-occur with traumatic events. And I think we've talked about before how those sensory pathways can be incredibly powerful, take you back to that traumatic event, whether it's a feeling, touch, smell, sound. And so it's a reaction.
Yeah. I want to talk about the potential villain of this episode, and that's Gambit, someone who feels like the team. In fact, I have this piece of audio about it's Gambit talking about his quote unquote friends. He's being asked, why are you willing, and why are we willing to believe that you're willing to go against your friends? Let's take a listen right here.
Why should I believe you'll betray your friends, your fellow mutants?
They're not my friends. They don't like me, don't trust me. They're just using me. Like you.
All right, we'll do it your way.
This is obviously sort of referencing the fight that Scott had with him in the last episode where he was suggesting that they check out Genosha, and Scott was like, if you don't want to be here, you should go. You know, you're no longer part of the team, whatever. And then that's when Xavier comes in and calms everything down. But we have seen that Gambit, not to the degree of Wolverine, doesn't necessarily get along with some of the other leaders. Maybe Scott's the problem. Maybe Scott is actually the problem here.
It's me.
But I do want to read Gambit's description here.
You don't want to go back to talking about why Scott's the problem?
Oh, that's going to be a whole episode on itself. But in this, and it's a shorter description because not a whole lot is known about Gambit. It says here, in fact, the first sentence is, not much is known about Gambit. He's in his mid-20s, Cajun, and he appeared virtually out of nowhere one day and saved Storm's life. A thief and a gambler, he keeps his past to himself. Gambit is the first X-Man anyone would suspect of duplicity or shady dealing. He may be corrupt, loaded with hidden agendas. Also, he's a lady killer. Even women who know better seem to be at his mercy. It's almost another mutant power. His actual mutant power is the ability to charge small objects with kinetic energy until they explode. Small darts or playing cards, thus become explosive devices in his hands. Who knows how big an object he can get to blow up? We'll see. Gambit is a crafty, circumspect loner. No one on the team is close to him. He seems to come through when the chips are down, but somehow no one is sure about him. On a scale of 1 to 10, Wolverine. So he does seem to be a bit more of that, despite the fact that his name isn't Rogue, he does seem to be that roguish, loner, standalone character that no one else can fully...
A little bit duplicitous.
Yeah.
Difficult to read, potentially independent, has autonomy. Yeah. I know we didn't necessarily compare him to Wolverine in the book there, but there is this kind of sense of I do it my way attitude.
Yeah.
That's similar to Wolverine.
Yes.
And I think that's got to come from, again, this sense of how did you survive up till this point? You probably had to
say anything you could, and
you had to make adjustments. You had to be somewhat maybe sneaky, slippery.
He is a prime example of what I expected Aurora to do.
Which is what?
Which is
strategize. Like
scope the event,
blend in, do what you're told.
Until the moment you could escape. And what I like about this episode is it's not even necessarily telling us that that he wasn't willing to give them up, because at one point he is willing to tell them where the X Mansion is. Although he says, I'm not going to tell you because then you'll just do away with me. Again, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
So I'll take you there and we can make this happen.
So can you walk through that a little bit? Jubilee.
Yeah.
I think we really are comparing these different reactions to this imprisonment, this concentration camp experience, where Jubilee, who, as we understand, does not have as much lived experience as the other X-Men alongside her, decides, I'm going to do what I know best. I'm going to lockpick my cell. Mm-hmm. I'm going to find the guy who has the device that locks and unlocks the collars, and that'll be what I do. That's how I free everybody.
Yeah.
I don't know that she thought further past that point of freedom.
Like what they would do beyond that.
Right. How will you disarm the guards? How will you
well, she did say
Sentinels?
The moment that she could unlock the collars, they would all be free to use their powers.
Yeah, they'll unleash
and so
their
I
power.
think the idea is we're going to be able to destroy anything you put in front of us because we are mutants.
And it's Gambit who tells. So she lockpicks her own cell, goes to Gambit, and says, "Here's the plan." And he has this sinister look.
Well,
He's
he turns around, goes back to bed, and is like, "This is your plan."
He's like, "I'm not into this."
Yeah, you do it.
So is that part of? So
and then the next day, when they try it and it doesn't work, they learn that it's because one of them turned in her plan, and it was Gambit. Like Gambit ratted her out, presumably for self-preservation. You know, if it was seen that Gambit was in cahoots with her, he might suffer a similar fate to whatever her punishment is going to be. But because he's the one who ratted her out, they look at him a little bit differently. He earns at least a little bit of their trust.
And that allows him the ability to leverage their interest in the mansion and where other mutants are, and he
because he's
got
the information that they need, so they're willing to work with him, especially since he has now given them reason to believe that he is not loyal to the X-Men.
But then he comes back, and so I think what I'm trying to get at, Brian, is his choice to betray Jubilee a part of a bigger idea that knowing Jubilee and knowing, despite her feistiness, this plan that she has is going to fail. And rather than get embroiled in her plan, to sit back and strategize a more complex way to infiltrate the enemies and to be able to get unlocked and out of his situation. In order to then liberate the other mutants, including his friends. Or is there something a bit more dark about his response to her?
That's what I'm saying. That's why I like this episode, is because even in the end, we don't know what he was really going to do.
Yeah.
Because when you think about his plan, it doesn't make sense as a bigger scheme to free everyone else. He's taken on a Jeep. You know, like they're taking him away from the camp in order to do other things, and ultimately he's going to guide them to the X Mansion, where presumably they'll destroy Xavier and his dreams along with it, and whatever. He then takes out his playing cards, and because he's wearing his collar, he cannot energize them, but he still plays 52 pickup, throws all the cards out, distracts them, hits them, leaves the Jeep. Then during a potential battle with them, before he can really get engaged, the two guards are taken out by a new character that we're introduced to. Comic book fans will recognize him instantly as Cable. Cable is described later in the episode as a former mercenary who used to work with the Colonel, now the leader, and that once he found out that the leader wasn't who he proclaimed to be and had no interest of bringing democracy to the world and to Genosha, he then threw his money back into his face and then basically waged war on the leader and his army. So Cable is now just sort of a one-man Rambo-like team on Genosha, taking out people strategically until he can get to the leader.
And Cable is a mutant, right? It's not clear yet.
We don't know yet. I know. But
I know.
We don't know yet.
I know, right? But in this episode,
he does. I think no. They do say when they're describing him that he is a mutant.
That's what I thought.
But they do not talk about what his mutant ability is. But he is a big hulking man, appears to have various metal parts. He has a scar or some sort of scorched mark around his eye, and it's sort of the shape of like a star-like mark over one eye. And he
he
carries a big weapon.
So just so I understand the history between Cable and the leader, he was a paid worker.
He was a mercenary.
So he was a mutant who was able to be in favor, be able to partner with the humans, with the non-mutant humans, in order to, well, because ostensibly he
was being manipulated
believed
into
in the
believing.
cause?
Yes, he believed in the cause, and then took the job with then the Colonel. He explains to Gambit that he's going to take out this army. Gambit then uses this opportunity to then become connected to Cable. So really, Gambit keeps playing the role of whoever it appears is going to win, I'm going to be on their side. So it does follow that description that we just read, written by Eric, very well. He's very duplicitous. You do not know whose side he is on at any moment in this episode. He goes back, frees the other mutants. So again, the tide has turned, and now it seems like, oh, now I can go free my friends. So he frees Jubilee.
Right. And
Jubilee
Jubilee
says she's kicking herself for
Well-
having ever believed that he would betray them.
Right. So Jubilee interprets this as him having this strategy all along.
Yeah. Yeah. How could you make me think you were a traitor? And he doesn't respond. Notice, like he doesn't respond to her. And then he frees Storm, and then a number of the other mutants that are trapped there. By the way, keep in mind that I don't remember where this show ends up going. Like, I'm kind of watching these episodes for the first time. Unlike Batman the Animated Series with you, where you kind of knew. I know most of these stories from the comics. I don't necessarily remember how they played out in the animated series. But a keen eye would notice in the same episode that you're introducing Cable, you are also seeing several members of what would ultimately become X-Force in that group, right? Farrell is there, and
there's a bunch of recognizable mutants.
recognizable
in the
mutants.
Camp.
Most of the camps there are recognizable.
I recognize Mystique,
Okay, so that's something else I was going to bring up.
who is just kind of almost backgrounded.
She's
This is a-
backgrounded.
this is a character
yeah,
who
yeah.
has no lines, is just kind of wandering around.
She's just one of the characters.
Who else? I thought it was Juggernaut without the armor.
Nope, that was the Blob.
Oh, that was the Blob. Okay.
That's the Blob. But you're actually catching on to something. Well, even maybe by accident.
Okay.
So in that group of people that you're talking about, we're talking about, let's see, I wrote down the people that I saw. I saw, well, let's go down your path. Okay. So I saw Blob. I saw Mystique. I saw Pyro. I saw Avalanche. These characters are all going to make up the Brotherhood of Mutants.
Okay.
I do not know if they already exist and that's why they're
Like
all
maybe
here.
they were captured together and that's why they're here.
Or if this is going to be the inciting incident that helps Mystique found the Brotherhood of Mutants. So you're now talking about 4 major villains that have now been freed from Genosha, for better or for worse. But on the other side, so, in the first episode, we talked about the desire to include Thunderbird,
Right.
but ultimately not. We see Thunderbird here. Now, we don't know if it's John or James Proudstar, but we know that he's wearing the Thunderbird outfit. Who else did I see?
Who are the Power Twins?
for starters, those would be DC characters.
I saw the Power
The Wonder
Twins.
Twins. So we're talking about Cable and we're talking about X-Force.
Okay.
So Thunderbird would have been like, he's on that first, he was part of the New Mutants, or forget Thunderbird for a minute, because ultimately Warpath is but you've got Cable, right? I saw Farrell in there and she had dialogue. I saw Domino. I saw Richter. I saw Caliban. These are all members of what presumably will be the new group, X-Force. Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of interesting and a little bit brilliant that this is the introduction of those characters and possibly the introduction of this team, because they're all in the same place and Cable's going to liberate them.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So yeah, there are a number of characters, and that's not even including Sunfire. It's not including who would have been a member of the classic X-Men. Yeah, there are a bunch of characters that they have introduced on Genosha that may end up just being background,
right,
or they might end up being
some
very
of them
important.
Could be simple. Yeah. Well, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a reference, a tribute. Reference to those characters without giving them lines and giving them stories, but understanding that this material comes from decades of comic narratives and they're building that in here in some way.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about how the episode ends with Storm really engaging in her empowerment. She had, I don't know, I understood that she was in the box for at least a day and a night, if not longer than that.
Yeah, probably longer.
A few days, a few nights.
Well, she was there longer than Jubilee was, because Jubilee was eventually
right.
then caught and thrown in as well. And Storm had already started to sort of lose it mentally. Like she had already been separated and in severe heat long enough that it was starting to affect her cognition.
Well, we've had an episode talking about the psychological effects of severe isolation over long periods of time, that the level of torture, while no one might be touching you or, inflicting pain on your body, that sensory deprivation and isolation is, incredibly impactful as a torture device. So she has, at this point, experienced the deterioration of her powers, but also mentally, she's very fatigued, sense of learned helplessness.
Yeah.
Lots of things happening there. And when she comes out, it doesn't take too long for her to kick into the leader that we know, who is going to bring in the winds and the rain. And that's the way that they essentially destroy this factory. It's interesting because they're building a dam and she uses water to kind of destroy the structure.
That and bolts of lightning she uses to strike down.
Yeah. So all of this human made infrastructure and the industrialism and the automation and the mechanisms of this are destroyed by natural forces.
Yeah.
I like what you said too about how she can't simply manifest these seasons anywhere. She has to use the bioculture in that area, and she does this. She seems to know it well. And I think it's Gambit that says, you got to slow down. You don't have all your powers with you. Or maybe it's Rogue.
It's Jubilee.
It's Jubilee.
Yeah, who says you're not strong enough yet. Like you've not gotten it back yet. And she does use up every ounce of strength she has standing there at the top of the dam. And as everything breaks apart, she falls. She can't fly away. And so that's when the Deus Ex Machina comes and Rogue collects her before she perishes. And then they all go back to the X Mansion and find that it is now rubble. And that's, again, the duplicity. That's when Jubilee is like, I knew you couldn't turn your back. I knew you couldn't betray your friends. And Gambit says almost jovially, well, how do you know? How do you know you can trust me? And then they all look over and the X Mansion is now destroyed. And so we don't know. Did he ultimately, give them up? I don't think so. I think we're going to find that that's probably the result of something else, coincidentally. But this episode leaves us still questioning the honor and loyalty of Gambit. And I appreciate that.
Oh, and Wolverine comes back at the very end of the episode.
Yeah. It's or in the middle of the episode. It's in the middle of the episode because, and then he has a cold.
He's been up
because
in the
he's
Arctic.
been up in the Arctic. He's been in Alaska or Canada. Yeah, she's like, "Oh, Wolverine, you're back. Where have you been?" And he sneezes and is like, "Somewhere cold."
No, you didn't like that?
I would think the mutant healing factor would have taken care of that before a sneeze kicked in.
He can't just get the common cold?
He's 93 years old and he doesn't really get sick and he doesn't.
Maybe the few sniffles is his version of what would, for the rest of us, we would be taken down.
Right. Him sneezing once is the equivalent of you having COVID when COVID first came, but yeah, I mean, it's a nice little tongue-in-cheek way of being like, hey, there was an entire episode that took place someplace cold that only we know about. They don't know that he was just there, and we don't know that he fought they don't know that he fought Sabretooth. We do. So when he sneezes,
we get it.
It's a
He's
little
winking
wink
at us.
Yeah, but realistically, I would think that healing factor would have prevented the sniffles.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really, really want to applaud Eric and his team for this episode because you have to remember this was ostensibly for children.
Yeah.
This was a Saturday morning cartoon. And yet they have managed to talk about slavery, racism, human trafficking, and all of that in one episode. One 22-minute episode. So my hat is off to those folks because I really think they nailed it in this one.
I also think, and I know I agree with you, and I've mentioned this before about X-Men, that whereas in other comic narratives, there's gimmicks to erase memories or to convert traumatic events to positive ones or to realign the story to, you know what I'm saying? To kind of erase the bad things from happening, erase people's memories, go back in time. Again, use these gimmicks to make the trauma less central or less, it matters less to the story. Yeah. And X-Men isn't doing that. It's making the adversity central to the story, but it's a matter of nuance, right? It's not feel bad for these characters or have sympathy or have pity. It's watch what resiliency looks like from an aspect that is very strength-based. Right. I practice liberation psychology, which is an approach to psychology that addresses and understands that some of the reasons some of us are unwell are very environmental. Mm-hmm. There's systemic pressures and risks and threats that act on our well-being, right? So it's this departure from more of kind of like that deficit model that says we have an illness because of our our individual self. There's an understanding that there are sociopolitical, cultural, historical, transgenerational reasons why, let's say, Storm has the anxieties and fears and phobias that she lives with every day.
Right.
And so going back to the way this is written, it doesn't make us pity her, but we see the way that those experiences, yes, they contribute to this manifestation of imperfection. Like, look, I'll even use some of your language. She's impulsive, or she's scared, or she's phobic.
Yeah.
But there's also this sense of how in the bigger picture do we understand, what lens are we using to understand that there's really nothing ill about her? Like, she's not unwell.
Right.
It's the forces around her that have imposed these threats and kind of created this lived experience for her.
Yeah.
And the stories in X-Men kind of give us that insight without making it superficial, making it like a backgrounded part of their experiences. It's very foregrounded, and it becomes a part of their persona, their psychology, their personalities. It's how she grows that we're really fascinated around. Like, how does she get the ability to come back from that? And
Right.
yet we see it happen.
Right.
And she's still not perfect.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. So you liked this episode?
I did. I liked this episode a lot. And
Okay.
I'm realizing the ones that we're used to it being in proximity with, like the Wolverines, the Scotts, like even Professor X, they're not really in this episode.
No.
This is about kind of a smaller ragtag team of X-Men who get captured.
Yeah.
So I sort of like the little side quest here. I thought it was good.
Yeah, there have been a couple of little side quests. It is an interesting concept for an animated series where everything is going on at the same time. Presumably, I mean, not just presumably, officially, Wolverine's time in Canada was at the exact same time that Xavier sent these three to Genosha. And so we're just seeing different things happening to different people depending on the episode. And so I'll be very curious to see the next episode, because it will explain, hopefully, a little more about the rubble that is now sitting where the X-Mansion had been. The next episode is called The Unstoppable Juggernaut. So I have a feeling we're going to get introduced to a very important character named Juggernaut. And that might be a pretty good explanation for why the mansion's in rubble. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Till then, Drea, why don't you tell the good folks where they can find you online?
You can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, or on socials, Dr. Drea Psychology.
And you can find me over at Instagram at B_Ward028. You can find us both on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter. You can find us over at Discord, where we're having a lot of really good conversations. And yeah, follow our family over at Fanbase Press. I do want to thank some of our patrons who have made this episode possible. Aaron Wenrick, Mike Ficklin, Dr. Jerome Anderson, Antonio Lopez, Kevin Ortel, Todd Stashwick, Heroes Journey Fitness, Trevor Schwartz, Trevor, I owe you a pin, Mark Pepper, Frank Moeller, Swara Salih, Rachel Acevedo Hoffman, and of course, my father, Carl Ward. Thank you all for your contributions. You can also get your name called out here on the next episode of the Arkham Sessions by joining our Patreon over at patreon.com/Arkham Sessions and joining the $5 tier that gets your name called out in the episode. Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to all my mutants and monsters in the Discord. I see you. I appreciate all your posts. I'm reading everything and enjoying it. So if you want to join the Discord, just come to the Instagram and hit that link.
Absolutely. And there have been some really strong, deep conversations that are happening over there. So we're very appreciative of our friends over there. There is something that I do want to bring up because I don't know when we'll have the opportunity to bring it up again. And that is the fact that you and I are going to be at WonderCon later this month. We have a panel. It has not officially been announced by WonderCon yet, but I can tell you to keep an ear out and an eye out on our social media, because the moment it is announced by WonderCon, we will also be announcing it. I will give you the hint by saying, if you like what we're talking about right now, you're going to love our panel. We have a couple of special guests, and
that's all you're really allowed to say.
That's all I'm allowed to say.
I think I can also say toward the end of WonderCon, maybe the last day of WonderCon, if folks are planning to
I think it's fair to say,
there.
yeah.
Okay.
If you're there on Sunday, I can't tell you what time, can't tell you what room until they announce it publicly. But we will have this panel on Sunday, and it will be very much attached to the conversations we're having right now. Be sure to join us for that. Keep an eye out. We would love to see you as always. And until then, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
Still plugged in.